This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. As a member of the City Council since 2005, Jessica Lappin, part of the powerful Manhattan delegation, which incidentally is 75% female, energetically represents the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Roosevelt Island. She chairs the Council's Committee on Aging and co-chairs the Women's Caucus, and she's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
They have something to do with each other, the Committee on Aging and the Women's Caucus. Aren't a high percentage of aged population is female?
Yes, and that's not surprising because they live longer than men typically. But what's happening here in New York is what's happening all across the country. Our older population is going to grow by 50% over the next two decades. It's a, you know, and for us as a city, I think we have to start planning for that growth.
And also people live longer here. Isn't that what just was recently revealed?
Yes, I think it makes sense.
Yeah,
we walk to the subway, we're more athletic.
It's just a place where you're more involved. I mean, you can't, it's hard to not be able to go out and get someplace with a mass transit and all the excitement around. It's unfortunate because I, for instance, would love to move to what I call the country. My kids live in the suburbs and they laugh at me, but to a house. I've always wanted to live in a house, so I could shop at Costco and buy a lot of things. But it doesn't make sense because as you get older, rather than live in a house, you should be here in the city with its vitality.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, you look at the cultural institutions, the mass transit. If you have the means to live here, you can get things delivered from your pharmacy, from your grocery store. So it can be a very nice place to grow old.
It is. And you also, there's a project that's the Academy of Medicine and the city government. What do we call that?
It's called Age Friendly New York City. We're creating the city's first senior center for the blind, which actually I'm not sure that there's one anywhere in the nation, but that's something that grew out of Age Friendly New York City, how we create new innovative senior centers of tomorrow.
So they're also, they're individualized or personalized. I mean, is there a plan for a lesbian, gay, lesbian?
Yes, there is. There are going to be 10 new ones, and one will be for LGBT, one will be for the visually impaired. Some of them will be built around neighborhoods that have either higher need or that have great providers where they're going to do fun things like underwater photography.
That's so great.
I think, you know, most seniors don't go to our existing senior centers. Right. For those who do, they are a critical lifeline, as you know. I mean, they're more than just a hot meal. They're places for people to come for companionship. But the reality is most of New York seniors don't use them. So what can we do to get people into these centers and then to learn more about the other things that the city offers?
Yeah, and just to be lively, that's so important.
Yes, to be engaged, and people want that. You know?
Now, you represent part of the East Side, right?
Yes, Upper East Side, Midtown, Roosevelt.
But you also represent Sutton Place, Beekman Place. Do people think that you represent a very wealthy community?
Yes, and that's one of the myths I always have to dispel. Because if you look at the tenement housing on York, on First, on Second, in the 70s and the 80s, it's people who were living in affordable units. Many of them still are rent stabilized, some rent controlled. And you have that sort of juxtaposition with the people who live on Sutton Place.
So, and also representing part of your district is Roosevelt Island.
Yes.
Which is the center of much excitement these days.
There is much activity out there, all positive.
How long has it been developed? I can't remember when it first started.
In the 70s, the city leased the land to the state. They came up with a very specific plan. It's a planned community to be mixed income, mixed race, and it has always been. And so it's a lovely community. It's like a small town in the big city. Maybe you could move there instead of the country. But it's a really, there's one street called Main Street. I mean, it has a lovely feeling to it.
And it's a mix. Now there's recently been luxury housing built there.
So there's
are they condos or rentals? Or
both.
And have they been, I mean, are people living in them?
Yes, yes, they're full.
There's a demand for it.
There is a demand. I think people appreciate having one subway stop or one tram ride into Midtown Manhattan. And there is a lot going on out there. We're building the Four Freedoms Park and Memorial to President Roosevelt, which has been 30 years in the making.
Absolutely.
It's going to be spectacular. I think people will come from all over the world to see it. Louis Kahn designed it.
Yes, ask you, yeah.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And beyond that, I mean, it was city land that was fenced off 364 days a year. So when we started this effort to kind of jumpstart the opportunity to build a memorial, it was to do that, but also to say, let's give this land back to the public because it's spectacular.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting.
Now you have a new concept coming to Roosevelt Island. Tell us about that.
So the city asked universities if they'd be interested in building a high-tech engineering or applied sciences campus here. And 7 top-notch universities responded, and we just awarded Cornell and Technion, which is the university in Israel, they had a joint application to build on Roosevelt Island.
It's going to be a graduate school to begin with?
It'll be a graduate school, about 2,000 students, but it's a $2 billion investment into the city.
Did all the applicants choose Roosevelt Island as a site?
No. So only Stanford and Cornell
So interesting.
said.
Yeah.
People had the opportunity to build on land they already had, like NYU, Columbia. And
Did the city offer the projects, or did these people discover the space?
so the city said in the RFP that they could build on Roosevelt Island, on Governor's Island, or in Brooklyn at the Navy Yard. So I, over the summer, mounted a campaign
I can imagine.
to convince the applicants to choose Roosevelt Island. And it was a lot of fun. We got all the other elected officials to say that they would welcome it, and all of the civic leaders on the island, because university development, institutional development, can be very controversial.
So how did you know who was? Did you know who was choosing it, or
No,
That's what made it.
So originally I said,
sent it
please,
to all the applicants.
yes, please. I sat down with anybody who was willing. Cornell and Stanford took me up on it. We did our pitch.
Great.
It was fun, and then those two officially said that was their preference. So then we focused on the city, and we waged our own sort of high-tech campaign on Twitter and Facebook and email to the mayor and to EDC to say, now you should pick Cornell or Stanford.
And then Stanford at the last minute went out.
They dropped out.
Do you have the faintest idea why?
I don't, beyond just what I've read in the paper, which is that maybe there was not as much enthusiasm from the board there. But at the end of the day, Cornell's proposal was outstanding. They got a $350 million grant, which, I mean, that's a huge donation.
That was a donation.
Yeah.
Right.
The actual design, I think, is stunning. So there was a lot of excitement beyond the Cornell Technion proposal. And Technion has a real track record in Israel of building businesses that grow out of their institution. And that's really what we want. I mean, they say they could ultimately 600 businesses, 30,000 jobs could come out of this in the next 3 decades. So that kind of economic development for New York and diversifying our economy that way. Just to me, the idea that Cornell and Stanford would be fighting to spend $2 billion in New York, it says a lot about where we are and where we're going.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Do they have a dorm space, and where are people going to live?
So that's still up for discussion. I'm going to have a town hall meeting. Cornell's already agreed to come and start to discuss some of these things. But they could build it as part of their campus, or there is the option, there are a few buildings still to be built that could be made into housing. So.
And then the transportation. It's all going to come. It's going to further, right?
I want ferries. That's what I want. The
That'll be
tram is wonderful, but at capacity. And the subway, it's very hard to get in at rush hour.
Because you're the last of the people to get in to come to Manhattan.
You know what it is? Nobody gets out on that stop.
Right. So you have to try to pile in.
So it's very tough.
Yeah. So your work in the city council, do you love it?
I do love it.
Why?
I do. Because to me, it's a very tangible way to work with people in the community and to do things.
Yeah.
I mean, you really see, if you're building a park with a community, or you're helping a school, or, all of these things are very tangible.
I used to think it's because you're in the middle of the people you govern. You don't go to Albany and leave your district, or Washington and leave your district. You're living right in the middle of it.
It's true.
Yeah.
And people approach you all the time,
Right.
as the grocery store the laundry room. I hate that. That's the one thing. When I'm in my pajamas doing my laundry.
It makes you human, so it's a very good campaign thing. I love to go to Fairway because I have a lot of older people. They still remember me, and it's something that's always fun.
I'm sure they do.
Some people in politics, they like national politics and they go for state office or something. And I think there's a big difference between city government and the other governments. Does it have a particular, I mean, it's the same thing living inside, but also do you feel the legislative role can be as important or
I do.
a different role?
I think it's different. It's less theoretical.
Yeah.
And when you are passing bills at the city council, when you're passing the budget, you're really impacting people's daily lives. Not that you aren't at state and federal government. You are, but
This
it's
they
different.
really know.
Right. You know what?
They can trace it directly to you.
Right. If their
Yeah.
library is going to be open, if they can go to their senior center, that's different from ending the war in Iraq. Not that we shouldn't be ending the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, but it's a very different, more personal thing.
Right.
And I enjoy that. And even if it's just the parking regulations and the potholes, and it's the real work
can
of
really
government.
do something.
Yeah, it's
Do
very
you
rewarding.
coordinate your work? I mean, I've always felt that there should be, and I'm not sure there isn't, greater coordination with state officials and national officials so that you really can see how the trail goes all the way to its origin.
I do. I have very good relationships. Politics is very personal, so I think it depends on how you get along with your colleagues. I'm very fortunate. I have a great Congresswoman, Carolyn Maloney, and my Assemblyman, Micah Kellner. We've all worked very collaboratively, and I think you can accomplish a lot more. Liz Kruger is dynamite in the state Senate, and
It's a great combination.
it is. We have a really good team. We have a new Assemblyman, Dan Court, who we'll get to know more, and I overlap a little bit with Senator Serrano. So it's very nice, and I think you really can, when you tackle issues on multiple levels, can accomplish more.
It's interesting. One of your pieces of legislation was the, I don't know what you called it, but the making the identification more specific on some of the counseling agencies that operate in the city, women's health agencies.
Oh, the crisis pregnancy centers, yes.
Now, but that is so interesting because it's been, there's an injunction against it starting to go into operation. So tell me about it.
Well, we're going to win on appeal. I think the judge got it wrong. But I'll take a step back and say there are these offices in the city that masquerade as licensed medical facilities, and they're not. They pretend to be doctors, and they really put women's lives at risk. They're very dangerous. And they have a clear agenda. And they are not just in New York, they're all over the country, but we were the fourth municipality to try to regulate them. And really, I view it as a truth in advertising measure.
It's really a consumer affairs.
Absolutely. If you should be honest about who you are and what you do and you don't do. So the bill says you have to disclose if you do or do not have a licensed provider on staff. You have to disclose if you do or do not provide prenatal care or abortion or emergency contraception or refer for those services. And you should advise women, by the way, if you're pregnant, you should seek out the advice of a licensed medical professional. The last thing, which I think is really interesting, because they're not medical facilities, they're not subject to HIPAA. So these women come in,
HIPAA being?
Privacy regulations around insurance and medical information. So these women come in and they give very personal information, where they live, who they think the father is, where they work, and it doesn't have to be kept confidential at all. And we heard at the hearing on the bill of a story of a woman where they followed her to her place of business to embarrass her in front of her coworkers into not getting an abortion. Regardless of what your views are,
horrendous.
it's completely inappropriate, and it should be against the law. So the bill required that they keep that information confidential. So to me, it seems like a very common sense. Be honest about who you are.
Yeah.
Now, this is the United States of America. Everyone's entitled to their view, but you're not entitled to stand there in a lab coat pretending to be a doctor, telling women lies like abortion causes breast cancer, causes death. They lied to women about where they are in their gestational period. And they brag about this, by the way. It's not as if they try to say, oh, we don't do that. They came to the hearing.
Are they privately financed?
They are privately financed. And they purposely open up in the same building as Planned Parenthood or across the street. They hire workers who stand outside to lead women in. So they think they're at Planned Parenthood. And what the women said at the hearing is, you realize after a few minutes you're in the wrong place. But by then, they've already taken your information, put you in a room, and sort of shut the door.
It's shocking, isn't it?
And there are over 20 of them in New York City. I was really surprised by it.
How did you hear about this?
I read that in Baltimore or Montgomery County that they had done something around these crisis pregnancy centers, and I had never heard of them. So I called a friend of mine who works at Planned Parenthood, and I said, what are these things? And we can't possibly have them in New York.
Right.
And she said, oh, here's what they are, and yes, we do. And then NARAL did a study where they went and compiled a list of them all and had some people go in undercover. The ACLU, who supported the bill in New York, had someone who was pregnant, and she wrote a very moving piece that was in I think the Daily News. She was over 20 weeks pregnant. They gave her a sonogram. They said, quote, she had been fully examined and everything was perfect, and sent her on her way. She had never seen a doctor, a nurse, a midwife. No discussion of vitamins, of any kind of prenatal care. And they obviously knew she was well on, halfway through her pregnancy. So what they're doing is unconscionable and very dangerous. And that's why I think we have a right to regulate them, and why I think we're going to win as we pursue it.
Isn't that interesting how a bill originates? It's either usually, I used to find, personal experience or a combination of repeated same kinds of complaints or something, or that you've read something that you think is really sounds
interesting.
Yeah,
I agree, and
Yeah.
I think the personal experience is a big piece of
Yeah.
it. Either something that happened to you or a friend or family,
and it's good. And was that how well was that received in the council?
well, the speaker was a huge champion, which it makes
Right.
all the difference in the world. And the chair of the Women's Issues Committee also was very helpful. But it was harder to pass than I
Is that
maybe thought
interesting?
it would be. Even in New York,
Did people have contact with the owners?
Well, they were very vocal. They held counter press conferences whenever we had something.
Yeah.
They came to the hearing because, as I said, they're proud of this.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't back down from it. They say, yes, we deceive women. Yes, we do this.
But we're saving lives.
But yes, but we're proud of it. So there was opportunity for that kind of exchange. I think there were some legitimate questions early on about the First Amendment, and working with Donna Lieberman at the Civil Liberties Union.
Yeah.
I think both made the bill better, but also set some people's
Yeah.
sort of minds at ease.
It's a very interesting question. The Women's Caucus, did they become active in support of it?
They were very supportive of it. I don't think there were any women who, well, I guess doesn't surprise me.
Who were opposed to it.
Yeah.
You worked for Gifford Miller when he was just a council member, right?
Yes.
So is there a big difference between how the council operates now and then?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's a lot, term limits obviously took a lot of people out of office and brought some new people in. And having that constant turnover does change the atmosphere there. In some ways good, in some ways bad. I think it does take a while to learn how to do the job well. And often you see people being forced to leave when they're just really kind of hitting their stride. But I do think it's a younger body that's got a lot of energy. Probably more diverse, although I don't know that for sure. But I would. It's so diverse now.
Yeah. Is there more independence?
I think there is.
And is there, the budget process has changed a little bit? Is it more transparent, as they use the word, more obvious?
I think it is definitely
Yeah.
more transparent. I mean,
Yeah.
being able to go online and search the Schedule C and look at groups. I mean, the process for applying is much more transparent. So I think this speaker has done a lot to try and make the process more transparent successfully.
Are you term limited?
I could run for one more term. I voted against the bill to extend term limits, but at least for now, I'm in a small group that could run for a third term.
Explain that. How does that work?
So when the bill was passed, it was for everyone, And then the mayor put on a referendum where the voters said, no, we want to revert back to 2 terms. So there's a group of roughly a dozen of us who, it's my understanding, could run 1 more time, but everybody who comes after will still have the 2 terms. It's a little confusing.
Did you have a 2-year term after the census?
4. That's coming up. The redistricting
That's right.
is
It's
coming
up now.
next year.
So then what happens? Then at the next election you get elected for 2 years?
For 4.
For
The
4.
2 2-year terms are once every 20 years.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because it's only once every 20 years that it falls on whatever
the year that is of an election.
Right.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
How did you get involved and interested in politics?
You know, nobody in my family was in politics, although we had a very active dinner table.
Yeah, people were interested
Yes.
in issues.
Yes. And my mother, I guess during the Anita Hill scandal, my mother became, for the first time in her life, involved, and that was then the Year of the Woman. And so I got involved, and we did, my first political action was that March on Washington that year for women's rights, and she supported Barbara Boxer and Patty Murray, and so for me, that was my initiation, and it was very exciting because Carolyn Maloney, all these women won.
Right, yeah.
And then I ended up going to Georgetown University, and in part because of that, I was interested. And I had an internship with Senator Moynihan, which was just great.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of changed my whole, not necessarily that I wanted to run for office, because, you know, he had been ambassador and he'd worked under many presidents.
Yeah.
But sort of the possibility of public service and how much fun and rewarding it is.
And are you trying to make change, or I'm always interested in, you know, long-term things. It's the legislation to make a law that really changes people's lives. It's really such an interesting drive that some people have and others don't.
Well, I think the thing for me is that it's how do you, there's so much to do. Right? So how do you focus and where do you spend your time? Because we don't have the bandwidth to do all the things we all want to do.
So what do you focus on?
I try to make a list at the beginning of the year as to the 2 or 3 things I really want to be most focused on. Because, you know, it's also a very reactive field.
Right.
You know, there was one year where I had both of the tragic crane collapses happen. I ended up spending that entire year writing crane bills, which we passed, dealing with the people who had been displaced, some of whom are still, working with the owners of the buildings on all of the city issues, et cetera. So, you know, you don't run for office saying, I'm going to spend a year of my life
on the cranes.
Right,
Yeah.
but that's what happens. And so I think for me to feel like I'm being successful, I want to both deal with the things that get thrown at you, but also trying to be as proactive as possible.
So what's on the list this year?
You know, that's a good question. I'm
suddenly
open to
realized
ideas.
it's at the beginning of the year.
I know. I mean, last year was my crisis pregnancy center bill, and I had a traffic stat bill.
Which I was used the other day because I'm trying to get a director, that third light on a corner. And I wanted to see what the accidents were in the corner.
Oh, so you went online?
I did. And I thought, well, this is a pretty good accomplishment. I wanted to thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So you can now go online and look at the intersections that you're interested in, if you can wade through it all, and then see how many incidents happened traffic-wise on that intersection.
Yes. And
that becomes a basis, doesn't it, for your...
Yes.
For what?
Well, the idea is that then you would work with your local precinct, your local elected officials, and say, okay, this intersection is dangerous, let's make it safer. And DOT is going to create their list of the top 20 most dangerous that they're going to then work on to make safer.
So you have the 2nd Avenue subway.
I do.
Now that is an enormous problem, isn't it?
Well, when it's done, it's going to be fabulous. In the interim, it's
When is it
creating a
going to
lot
get
of
done?
2017. Which is not that
That's
far
coming,
away.
right.
It's not that
And
far
have
away.
people been displaced? Yes, right?
People have been displaced. The people who've been displaced are not the most unhappy because they're gone. It's the people living amidst all of the chaos. The business owners have been very hard hit.
Yeah.
And the residents who are right there. I mean, look, a public works project of this magnitude, it really impacts people's quality of life. There's no 2 ways about that.
Have they gotten more used to it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, There are different phases to it. I mean, right now I have some very serious concerns about the air quality. And the feds agreed and asked the MTA to do some extra studies. They promised us they would have them by the end of the year, and they didn't. And so I think they need to be held accountable because this is the air that we're breathing. And I mean, I have photos I could show you of these dust storms. You would think you were in the desert. I mean, it's
Well, what can you do
scary.
about that?
Well, they did say that they took a month off in November, December to put some more,
Filters or something?
yeah, they use water to sort of tamp it down, but to create some better systems, both underground and on the surface, to reduce the levels in the air. But I'd like to see the studies. I mean, I think people have a right to know if they're breathing clean air.
So is that, well, that's a continuous thing on your agenda.
Yes, that's something that goes from year to year to year. But I'm certainly open to ideas from you, from viewers.
And people
can
should
email.
call or email
They
your
can
office?
email me at
What's your address?
jlappin@council.nyc.gov.
And you really get the messages?
I really do. They can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. I'm very hands-on with both of those. So.
And you actually look at them?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, finding myself not in the council and wanting to get something done in the city seems to me to be such an enormous challenge. And I keep saying, well, Ronnie, you should know this. It's a very difficult thing for constituents to find their way.
Because of 311.
And 311 becomes an important element, doesn't it, for your complaint or your problem? Because
Yes.
they look at it as for the counts, the cause, the number of calls?
Yes, you have to make the 311 call. But I always tell people you have to call your council person because otherwise I sort of feel like they go in the abyss.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's something simple, then they will do it.
Yeah.
But most times, people call the office, it's not something simple.
Well, Jessica, I hope you're going to get a lot of calls because I hope a lot of people from your district are watching this program. It's been very nice to have you, and thank you very much.
It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. So we covered. Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.